Never claim that if Team X was in another conference, they would dominate it. You don't know. I don't know. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. The season is here. Ladies and gentlemen, it is week one. We're going to kick off week one in style today. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Today is Monday, August 26th, and we appreciate you coming to us from wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether that's the podcast platforms on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. If you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, thanks for being here. Going to be an awesome show today. Before we move ahead, we got to look back just a little bit, look at week zero. We're not going to spend a ton of time on Florida State, Georgia Tech. That was 2 days ago. They've probably gotten breakdowns from every talking head in the sport about Georgia Tech and Florida State. Massive win for Georgia Tech. Huge disappointment for Florida State. We'll break it down, but we're not going to live and just dwell on it and sell. And people are like dancing on Florida State's grave. It's like, guys, it's week one. There's still a lot to play for. Goodness gracious alive. And Georgia Tech, I mean, they had a great performance. But guys, I mean, I don't know if I'm putting them in the playoff yet. So let's just have some fun. We'll break it down and we'll explain why that mattered, why that happened, and what needs to be done for both programs moving forward to continue, well, for Florida State to get better and for Georgia Tech to continue to do what they did this past Saturday. We feel like we have a very, very intellectual fan base and listening audience. We are very grateful. We think we have the smartest football fans that follow us. We are so, so proud of how we've grown the show and how you guys have supported the show. And we really appreciate just how smart and into it you are as college football fans. The other thing we're going to do, we're going to give you some nevers. There's 10 nevers that we want you to apply to this college football season. Things that if we want to be smart fans, if we want to be smart consumers of the sport, we will never do these things. So we're going to give you those. And then finally, we're going to give you some numbers that you need to know. Just some interesting things that popped up in our research over the last few days, few weeks. Just some interesting numbers to know, like streaks, records, things that haven't happened in a long time. Just kind of interesting. So we hope that you enjoy it. So let's dive in. Let's start with week zero. Florida State, Georgia Tech breakdown now. Let's put a bow on week zero just for a moment before we get into our top 10 nevers that we will apply to the college football season this year, okay? Florida State and Georgia Tech. Everybody's going to overreact right now to, oh, well, Florida State's this, Georgia Tech is this. Let's not do that just yet. Historically, though, let's just talk a little bit about how big of an upset this was. Florida State going into Saturday's game 17-1 in season openers as a top 10 team against an unranked opponent. That lone loss came in 89 against Brett Favre in Southern Miss. So a little bit of a crazy thought process here. I don't think Haynes King is the second coming of Brett Favre, first and foremost. But I do think that Georgia Tech under Brent Key has done an amazing job operating in an underdog role. We kind of told you all throughout the offseason, whether it was about Notre Dame, whether it was about Florida State, whether it was about Georgia, whether it was about all the other ranked teams that Georgia Tech will face. Hey, be careful. That's how we've described everything about Georgia Tech's potential. You look at their personnel, Haynes King, while he is not one that is going to always play a clean game, he did for the most part on Saturday. Did have the fumble late, did have the bobbled exchange between him and Jamal Haynes that could have been catastrophic, but it wasn't. But if you look at Georgia Tech's recipe, man, they took the fight right to Florida State. And they had 3 drives that were 11-plus plays. They had 3 drives that were 6-plus minutes. One that was nearly 8 minutes that resulted in a touchdown in the first half. And their game-winning drive, 12 plays, 6 minutes and 33 seconds off the clock. You kick the game winner with zeros on the clock. So you win or lose, all based on that one drive. They also, when they got in the red zone, they scored touchdowns. 3 for 3 in red zone touchdown drives. Okay. The other thing that was a little bit eye-popping to me, Georgia Tech, their biggest issues last year were on the defensive side, particularly the defensive front. Well, they did an amazing job against a Florida State offense that everyone wanted to talk about and tout just how experienced their offensive line was. Yes, their offensive line is remarkably experienced. They should be pretty good, but they're not a group that's just going to move you off the line of scrimmage. This is not a group that would be comparable to that of a Georgia or a Michigan from last year. Just because you have the same guys back doesn't mean they're all of a sudden overnight going to become 5 first-round picks across the board. You look at what they were in the first drive, 58 yards right down the field, 5 carries, amazing. Do you realize that they averaged just 40 rushing yards on the remaining 26 carries? That's an average of 1.5 yards per rush after the first drive of the game. They also got stuffed at or behind the line of scrimmage 7 out of 31 carries. That's surprising. That can't happen if you're Florida State. Their rushing success rate was 33%. Comparatively, Georgia Tech's rushing success rate was in the high 60s. So I think they were a little bit too conservative in the passing game. DJ Uiagalelei, I saw a lot of people blaming him for the result. I didn't think they let him play. I mean, until the drive there towards the end where they said, hey, DJ, you got to make some plays for us by throwing it and making some plays downfield, they really didn't let him cut it loose. In the first half, everything was at or behind the line of scrimmage with the exception of the deep ball to Toafili that resulted in a pass interference. DJ had proved last year at Oregon State that he's not going to be a crazy efficient quarterback, but he can throw the ball down the field. And I don't think they did enough of that, because if you saw the secondary defenders trigger against the run, they should have been more aggressive trying to create big plays. And I do think FSU's defense, perhaps maybe the most disappointing aspect of Saturday's performance, was this was supposed to be a game-changing defensive front. Their defensive tackles, there was supposed to be no drop-off. You look at the edges, Patrick Payton's back, you bring in Marvin Jones. And while those guys, the edges, they're not going to have a huge impact against a really athletic quarterback like Haynes King, but the defensive tackles and the linebackers, man, they did not play very well against the run. So I think Florida State can still do a lot of things here in this upcoming season, but they're going to have to get a whole lot better right up the middle of their defense at linebacker and at defensive tackle. And then for Georgia Tech, this is who they are. They are giant killers, and they will continue to be a problem for everyone they face. But based on what I saw on Saturday, that is a recipe that can be replicated over and over and over again. If you can win the line of scrimmage the way they won, and if you can tackle in the open field the way they tackled, and their receivers are going to block and show selflessness with how they blocked for their running backs and quarterback, they have something going down there in Atlanta. So be careful. If you see Georgia Tech on the schedule, you better bring your A game, because if you don't, then Georgia Tech is very capable of knocking you off. Credit to Brent Key, just a terrific performance for his team. If you're new to the show, for instance, it's the first time maybe you're watching an in-season Monday edition of Always College Football, we always do a top 10. Most of the time, it's the top 10 things we've learned from the previous week. That's where we'll be vast majority of the regular season. Top things we learned from the 2 days before or the week before of college football. Well, we really pride ourselves, and we believe, and there is not statistical evidence that supports this. We have not made all of our listeners take IQ tests and Wonderlic tests. We've never done that. But I do think, and this is just based on my interactions with our listeners, I think we have the smartest college football fans. I really believe that. The smartest college football fans that watch our show of any show. Like, I really believe our listeners are highly, highly intelligent about the sport and care greatly about the sport. So we love you for that. We really, really do. We love you for caring about the sport the way we do. And we value that you think about it maybe on a secondary level from that of the average, screaming at the clouds type of approach after a weekend of disappointment, right? Okay, so we're going to provide you with 10 things you should never do this season if you want to consider yourself an intelligent college football fan. And look, we're all insane. So if you fail at one of these 10, believe me, I'm going to fail alongside you, because I'm probably going to do one of these things this year, and you're going to hold me accountable. You need to. You're going to hold me accountable. Say, Greg, that's one of the nevers. We can't do that. So make sure, hey, we're going to coach each other up. We're going to get better together. All right. Let's start with number one. Never use conference record versus other leagues as a way to support your conference's superiority. I'll say that one more time. Never use conference record versus other leagues as a way to support your conference's superiority. Let's go back to last year. Okay, last year, the ACC, and this all came up around playoff time and at the end of the season before the championship weekend and when Florida State was left out. Well, look at the ACC. The ACC is better than the SEC. Look at their record head-to-head. Yes, the ACC went 7-5 against the SEC last year. Totally get that. The ACC also went 4-4 against the Big Ten. They had a pretty good record in the non-conference. The problem is you cannot compare apples to apples when you're taking a top 2 or 3 team in the ACC and playing them against the 9th or 10th best team in the SEC and claiming superiority because your number 3 team beat the SEC's number 9 team, a la Clemson, who beat South Carolina. Okay? Miami also beat Texas A&M. That, to me, was a little bit more comparable. Both teams were about 6-6, 6-7, but I'm not going to start pounding my chest because Wake beat Vandy. That, to me, is not an indicator of the ACC being stronger than the SEC. And look, if you're an SEC fan, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, well, the SEC's superior. Did you not see Ole Miss's beatdown of Georgia Tech? Did you not see Georgia beat Georgia Tech? Did you see Tennessee beat Virginia? Like, those games are not an indicator of what conference is better. It's purely about matchups. And who beat who is only going to be applied when you take a team that is like-minded in where they would rank in their league and play them against a team that is like-minded in where they might rank in their league. So, for instance, last year, you take, I don't know, Georgia in the SEC and play them against Florida State in the regular season, then that game would have significant weight. I'm not going to give Florida State a ton of credit for beating an average Florida team. You know what I'm saying? So let's not use conference record against other leagues as a way to support your conference's superiority. The Pac-12, for example, they went 3-2 against the Big Ten last year. Do you think the Pac-12 is better than the Big Ten? I don't. But if you do, because of the 3-2 record that the Pac-12 had against the Big Ten, then we'll just have to agree to disagree. Let's go next to number 2. I already kind of alluded to this. Let's not use, well, we're doing nevers. Never use bowl outcomes as an indicator of future results. And this is as true now as it's ever been. With opt-outs and transfer portal, the collective buy-in in bowl games is down across the board. Doesn't mean we shouldn't watch it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't enjoy it. You're a fan of college football. I'm a fan of college football. I'm a traditionalist. Bowl games still matter to me. I enjoy watching them. I think it means a lot for the player. It's a reward after a lot of hard work all season long. Remember, our season as players doesn't start on Labor Day weekend. Our season as players starts in the middle of January. So to know that I get to work all off season, all through spring, all through summer, all through fall camp, and then all through the regular season, and I win 6 games, I get to go to a bowl game and maybe go on vacation for the first time ever. I think that's great. But how many people are going to use bowl outcomes as an indicator of the greatness of their team or the terribleness of their opponent, right? Like, how many of y'all think Ohio State's offense is going to be terrible this fall? Show of hands, just let me know. If you think Ohio State's offense is going to be bad this fall, then I can't help you. Based on the 3 points they scored against Missouri the last time we saw Ohio State. And I'll give you an even better example. Boston College played SMU in the bowl game last year and beat them by double digits, nearly. I think it was like 24-14, or like they beat them rather easily. I mean, they beat them with relative ease, okay? Well, SMU to win the ACC this year now, remember Boston College and SMU, they're now in the same league. They're now in the ACC together. Well, SMU, even though they lost to Boston College pretty convincingly, they're about 13-1 to win the ACC. Well, Boston College is 250 to 1. But BC beat SMU in the bowl game last year. Well, we shouldn't use bowl outcomes as an indicator of future results. That's a never. Okay, never use bowl outcomes as an indicator of future results. Number 3, never claim ranked wins when the team you beat is no longer ranked. And vice versa. Never claim unranked wins when the team you beat is now ranked. There's been a bunch of examples of this. I thought the best example would be 2017 Alabama against Florida State. They played in week 1. It was a highly publicized game all throughout the offseason. Everyone's like, oh man, that Florida State-Alabama game is going to be incredible. Like, I can't wait to watch that one. So much buildup, so much hype. Alabama goes on to win the game convincingly. DeAndre Francois, Florida State's quarterback that year, ended up getting hurt. As a result, Florida State could never really get back on track. That team went on to finish 6-6. And throughout that 6-6 season, they had some really terrible performances, like a 35-3 loss to Boston College. Okay? But at the end of the year, people were still citing Alabama's win against Florida State as a great win because they were ranked number 3 in the polls at the time in which they beat them. And there's a handful of examples of this, okay? A handful of examples. Like 2014 or 2016 Auburn started the season ranked number 6. Well, by the time you beat them in November, you can't sit there and claim that your win against a top 15, top 10 ranked Auburn is still a good win because the wheels fell off. The same can be said for a handful of other teams that have looked great on paper early, like 2016 Notre Dame. When Texas beat Notre Dame in week 1, everyone said Texas is back, folks. Remember that? Remember that call that Joe Tessitore had? Texas is back, folks. Well, the wheels came off. Notre Dame went 4-8. Like, that was no longer a good win for Texas because the team they beat ultimately wasn't that good. So don't look at the number next to the name when trying to evaluate in the past whether or not that win was good. We have to evaluate where that team is at the time in which you're trying to make the evaluation. So even though a team is undefeated, 5-0, ranked number 7 in the country, and you beat them, when we fast forward to the end of the year, if that win holds up because that team rebounded from the loss and they finished 10-2, and they're still ranked in the top 15, awesome. You get great credit for that win against number 7 ranked undefeated fill-in-the-blank university. Well, if the wheels come off after you beat them and they're 5-1, after you beat them, they finished 7-5, that's no longer a good win. Okay, so never claimed ranked wins, never claim unranked wins, especially when things shift. And there are examples too. Like, we'll get to this one in a minute. 2016 SC, you beat them early in the season. They're unranked. They're 1-3 in the first month. And then fast forward to the end of the year, they win the Rose Bowl. Okay? So it can work the other way too, where maybe they weren't ranked when you beat them, but they kind of got things going. And then all of a sudden they're a good team at the end of the year. You can use that same example with Oklahoma State. Like, Oklahoma State is a good win. It just didn't look that way after the first 4 weeks of the season. I digress. Same page there. Never claimed ranked wins or unranked wins when the team that you beat is no longer ranked and or ranked. Got it? All right. Number 4, never give the Heisman away before the middle or end of November. Okay? Never give out the September Heisman. There's so many examples of this. I chose 3 that really were at the forefront of my mind. Let's go back to 2012. Geno Smith of West Virginia. In September, he was 141 of 169, threw for 1,700 yards and had 20 touchdowns en route to nearly a 210 passer rating. He had 656 and 8 scores against Baylor. Okay. He finished the season outside the top 10 of the Heisman Trophy voting. So he was a lock to get the Heisman in September. but obviously the wheels came off as the season went along. Let's go next to 2014. Kenny Trill Hill. In September, 1,700 passing yards, 17-2 touchdown interception ratio, added about $150 on the ground, threw for 322 yards on 24 plays against SMU. Fast forward to the end of the year, would have won the Heisman on September 30th, but we fast forward to the end, and he was actually outside the top 10 in the voting. 2015, Leonard Fournette had 600 rushing yards in 3 games. And 8 touchdowns in those 3 games. Killed Auburn, went for 228 against Auburn, and didn't play a down in the second half. Well, at the end of the year, he didn't even finish in the top 6. So let's avoid talking about the Heisman before November, mid-November, late November, because what you do in the first month of the season is likely not going to lead to you bringing home that trophy. Let's go next to number 5. And this is a big pet peeve of mine. Never cite star rankings on why a player or a unit should be good. I was listening to a podcast just the other day, and I understand. I've always said this. Like, I really appreciate the recruiting sites. I do. I think the recruiting sites do an amazing job. They work so hard on trying to get these evaluations right. They do an amazing job generating buzz around recruiting and trying to make our sport a little bit more year-round. I'm all for it. But the stars are not written in stone. There are a million different 5-star guys that are riding the bench throughout their college career. There's a million examples of 2 stars that go on to have all-pro or Pro Bowl caliber careers. I heard a podcast the other day and they said, well, hey, this group, they got 4 stars across the board on the O-line. They should be able to bully people. Not necessarily. I mean, just because they had 4 stars coming out of high school and that was their evaluation at that time, it does not mean that's who they are when they're 21 or 22 years old, 3 years into college. So stars are a great starting point. It's a great way to generate interest. And there is merit to teams collecting as many 3, 4, 5-star prospects as humanly possible. There's merit to that. Having depth on your roster is a really valuable thing. And more often than not, the star ranks are going to be pretty good. But there are a million examples in which they're not very good either. So if a guy has 5 stars and he's riding the bench, he's probably riding the bench because he's not really a 5-star guy. And you got to trust your coaches to put the best player in there. And I think they do, considering job security is of the utmost importance within the coaching profession. Number 6, never have just one screen going on a college football Saturday. And I understand, believe me, like I am in a family of Alabama fans. And when the Alabama game's on, doesn't matter if Alabama's up 42-6, they're watching every second of the Alabama game. To which I will remove myself and know I got a good feel for what happened in that game. I'm going to go downstairs or I'm going to go and get my iPad and I'm going to watch every other game that is still in doubt here in the middle of the third quarter. Like with the access that we have now, whether it's on the computer, on a laptop, on an iPad, on a phone, there's no reason to ever have just one screen going. And we even have, whether it's YouTube TV or the ESPN app or other apps, like you can do a quad box on your one TV. There's never an excuse to just watch one game. Like we got to have all the games going. So we got to absorb all that information because when we have those conversations at the end of the year, this team against this team, that team against this team, we need to be able to have a credible argument to be made on one side or the other. And the only way you can make that credible argument is by watching multiple teams every week. So that's just a little fun one. Never have just one screen going on a college football Saturday. Number 7. I've noticed a lot of people get really, really mad when people say games are lost, not won. Fine. Never get mad when people say games are lost, not won. Like recent memory, last year, Georgia Tech. Do you think Georgia Tech won that game against Miami last year? Or do you think Miami gift wrapped that game and handed it to Georgia Tech? What you tell me. I mean, if you think Georgia Tech went and won that game on their own merit, by all means, totally support that. I am going to take the other side of it and think Miami lost that game by fumbling the ball or running it or doing whatever it is they decided to do, which ultimately led to Georgia Tech having a chance to steal the game out from under the Miami Hurricanes. I'll give you another example, one that you can probably all remember. Michigan against Michigan State is a million years ago. Who can forget when punter Blake O'Neill fumbled the snap and everything went absolutely crazy before Jalen Watts-Jackson picked up the ball, ran 38 yards for the game-winning touchdown? Now, did Michigan State go and steal that game? Perhaps, but really it was more because Michigan blew it, right? And there's a million examples of that. You're going to sit there and I'm going to say at some point this year, well, they had 4 turnovers. The quarterback threw 3 picks and they fumbled inside the red zone. That's why Team X lost to Team Y. And you're going to say, no, they forced those turnovers. They forced those interceptions. They forced that fumble. That's fine. That's fine. You can take that approach. We are totally good agreeing to disagree. But I happen to think in college football especially, more games are just flat out given away than they are, hey, we're going to go ahead and take this thing. Like just flat out given away versus going ahead and taking it. So all that being said, games can be lost. So never suggest and never get mad if a game is just gift wrapped and given to the opponent. We're not taking away the credit that you get for winning the game. We're just acknowledging that if this team would have done what they were supposed to do, it wouldn't have resulted in the outcome that it resulted in. Okay? There's a lot of don't screw it up examples in college football, and there's a million times in which guys do screw it up, and it leads to a win for the other team. Let's go next to number 8. And this one drives me nuts. And I know it drives Mark Kubiak nuts because he always brings it up. Never claim that if Team X was in another conference, they would dominate it. You don't know. I don't know. You cannot sit there and tell me, well, if LSU played in the ACC, they'd be undefeated. Or if A&M played in the Big 12, they'd dominate the league. Well, if Florida State last year played Alabama's schedule, they'd lose 4 games. Like taking a team and putting them in another team's shoes and playing the what if game isn't good for our evaluation process. It's also not rooted in fact. It's speculative. And while I'm all for speculating, I'm all for having fun while speculating, people try to use these arguments in favor of who should be in the playoff. And we can't speculate. I think when it comes to this team was in this conference, this team was in this conference. Well, if Liberty played in the Sun Belt, would they be undefeated? I don't know. Or if SMU played Liberty's schedule, would they have been undefeated last year? I don't know. Probably. But I just don't know for sure. So we got to be very careful when making those claims of if this team were in this league, this is how they'd look, because we just don't know. And I will probably break that rule at some point. So help me out, keep me accountable, and let's do this thing together. At number 9, if you have a night game, never peak too early while you're tailgating. Seen a lot of this now over the years. Not everybody's a professional like the fans at LSU, okay? Not everybody's a pro, where they can go 10, 12 hours before they walk in the stadium and cheer their brains out. Seen a lot of guys over the years where I'm walking into the stadium and look, I'm just observing. And a lot of people are already in the fourth quarter 3 hours before game time. Just saying. Simple one. Never peak too early if you're tailgating for a night game. And then finally, at number 10, never jump to conclusions about who your team is after week 0 or week 1 performance. And all I have to do is just cite one game, one season as to why we should never do this. 2017 Rose Bowl game was between USC and Penn State. USC started that season losing 52-6 to Alabama. They went on to lose 2 more games after the complete beatdown at the hands of the Crimson Tide. So they started 1-3, They lost to Utah on the road in week 4. And then they said, you know what? This Sam Darnold guy, we're going to go ahead and put him into the lineup and let's just see what happens. This Ronald Jones guy at running back, I think he's got a chance to be a playmaker. Well, he goes on and rushes for 1,000 yards. This Juju Smith-Schuster, this guy's the real deal, man. Let's start feeding him the ball. Let's get Porter Gustin at the end working. Adoree Jackson, all-purpose player. Let's get him working. Like a team that started 1-3 ended up reeling off 8 consecutive wins en route to a Pac-12 title and ultimately a Rose Bowl victory over the Penn State Nittany Lions, who also started the season 2-2. They lost to Pitt in the second week of the season, and then 2 weeks later against Michigan, they lost 49-20. Complete beatdown at the hands of Michigan. Well, they finished the regular season by winning 9 straight, including the Big Ten championship, including James Franklin's only win against Ohio State, and a really pretty amazing performance to beat Wisconsin to close out the regular season. You had Trace McSorley, you had Saquon Barkley, you had Chris Godwin at wide receiver. Like both those teams were a combined 3-5 in the first month of the season, only to figure it out and play great down the stretch. So with where we've now gone in college football with the 12-team playoff, the expanded playoff, your season is not over in September. Even if you get off to a horrendous start, there's still so much left to play for, especially if you win your league. You might ultimately end up with a top 4 seed, even if you start 1-3. So just hang in there. Don't overreact and let your coaches coach your team out of that hole that you might have put yourself in week 1 or week 0. We'll leave you today with a few numbers that we found a little bit interesting and kind of doing some prep, looking at some trends, identifying just some unique things that stood out to us. So we wanted to leave you with some numbers that you need to know or numbers that you just might find pretty interesting, like we did. That's pretty much it. 5. That's 5 straight wins for Georgia Tech against ranked ACC opponents. This year, beat number 10 Florida State. Last year, number 17 Miami and number 17 North Carolina. And then in 2022, they defeated North Carolina again. They were number 13 at the time and number 24 Pitt. So, like we said earlier, Georgia Tech, a giant killer here in the ACC for sure. 12. That's how many straight years Notre Dame has had an offensive lineman as a captain until this year. From 2012 to 2023, it was never a weakness or a huge concern, but this year it is with who they have coming up this week. And we'll break down A&M and Notre Dame in its entirety on Thursday's show. That could be a significant storyline going into that game. Could be a significant storyline for Notre Dame all season long. We'll see. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's okay. Hopefully we don't talk about their line because it's good. That'd be great. 2, that's the number of true freshman starting quarterbacks that Nebraska has ever had. Adrian Martinez was a true freshman starter a million years ago. Well, 5-6 years ago, whatever it was. And then Dylan Raiola will be the starting quarterback this weekend as well. 8, that's the amount of regular season wins Texas A&M has had over top 10 opponents since joining the SEC. Notre Dame currently in the top 10. A&M is 8-13 against regular season wins against top 10 opponents. So pretty dang good record for Texas A&M against top 10 opponents since they joined the SEC back in 2012. 39, that's the consecutive regular season wins by the Georgia Bulldogs. They'll put that one to the test against Clemson this year in week 1. 21 years since NC State has had a 10-plus win season. This is a great opportunity for NC State with what they got back, the improvement they've made already at several different spots in the portal. Really like NC State this year and what might be a wide open ACC there between teams 3 and 6. We'll see how it all unfolds. 26 is a number you need to know. That's how many years it's been since West Virginia has beaten Penn State. They've only played 6 times, but that's an opportunity to end what's been a quarter-century long drought for the West Virginia Mountaineers. 15, that's losses that the Florida Gators have had against ranked opponents since 2020. Florida since 2020, think about this, just 3-15. 3-15. The Florida Gators against ranked opponents. So hopefully this week, chance to play against Miami at home, slight underdog. Maybe you can pull off the upset and end what's been a pretty disappointing streak against ranked competition for Billy Napier and co. And then finally, 4. That's consecutive seasons that LSU has started 0-1. They have not won their season opener since 2019. Pretty crazy when you think about it. And you're wondering who'd they lose to? Well, Florida State last year, Florida State the year before. In 2022, I don't even remember, to be honest with you. I believe it was UCLA. And then that was in 2021. And then in 2020, they lost their season opener to Mississippi State, where they gave up 1,000,000 yards to Mike Leach in his debut as the head coach for Mississippi State. So 4 consecutive seasons, LSU started 0-1. Crazy to think about. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. Tell your friends about it. We'll be here every Monday. We'll be here every Wednesday. We'll be here every Thursday. And then we'll have our kind of off the top of our head flow of consciousness reaction show on Sunday mornings as well. So you want to lock in here on the ESPN YouTube channel. You also want to download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. So we appreciate all of you for being with us here today. For Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.